Bernadette Karff. She is a trans woman from Philadelphia who works doing radical social justice work. So Bernadette, tell us more about yourself.
I'm a trans woman. Obviously, I do a lot of radical social justice work. I gave a presentation at the Philadelphia Trans Health Conference in 2017 about the importance of radical social justice work and protesting and the impacts that the Trump administration has had, and kind of summing that all up. I'm also a poet. I write about my experiences as a trans woman and also with my battle my battle against an eating disorder.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I just wanted to talk about the bathroom restrictive laws, specifically in North Carolina. And in your opinion, what has the impact been on the overall trans community due to the concept of bathroom restrictive laws?
Oh, it's been huge, honestly. So when you start talking about trans restricted bathroom laws, what it really boils down to a lot of the time is this concept that for instance, trans women aren't real women. Right. And what it does is it completely invalidates the gender identity of all these women, men, non-binary people, who have claimed this identity and this is who they are and are now being told that's not okay. So it really dismisses the concept of self-identifying gender. It also puts trans people in a really dangerous situation. Not being able to use the bathroom congruent with your gender can be dysphoric, and dysphoric is that kind of feeling of your body and your mind not quite like gelling together. So it can create a lot of dysphoria. Actually, it can create health problems too. It can, that's why trans people have a really high rate of UTIs, urinary tract infections, is because of the fact that you need to pee and you can't use the bathroom, so you hold it, and that's why you end up having a large percentage of the trans population who ends up getting frequent UTIs. So not only is this, having social implications, but it also has physical implications. And not only that, it sets this kind of societal precedent that trans people are not really who they say they are, that they're kind of putting on this facade that they're fakes.
Right. And yeah, speaking of the social impacts, what do you think has been that impact on the cisgender people due to these regulations?
Oh, it's been big, absolutely. I think one of the major impacts that it has on cis people is it gives this platform that allows cis people to dismiss all trans identities. And that's a major problem, because now you're invalidating these self-claimed identities, and it takes a lot of work to be able to get to a point where you can come out. And there's a lot of social implications, and there's a lot of societal implications. A lot of trans people end up on the street. A lot of trans people end up doing sex work. They get kicked out by their families or disowned by their families. A lot of trans people end up having really difficult lives, and that's why trans women have such a low life expectancy. The average life expectancy of a trans woman is under 40, which is terrifying because of the high rates of murder. And I mean, you look at just the reported murders, and they continue to go up continually every year. So this impact on the cis community is that it gives them this ability to ostracize, to demonize, to separate themselves and be like, you're not real. And it's gender policing and gatekeeping. And you hear a lot about that in Julia Serrano's book, Whipping Girl, which is like a really interesting book on trans feminist theory. And she really explores that concept, I think, in a really interesting way. And so when you give people this platform for hatred, not even hatred, but discrimination, that expands to more and more minority populations. And so this doesn't just affect trans people, this doesn't just affect cis people, and this doesn't just affect the concept of cis-trans relationships. It impacts minority groups all across the country and the way that they're treated.
Wow, so it sounds like this has left a lot of space for intolerance and hatred in the country.
Oh
not just for transgender people, but also, like you said, minorities. And the Department of Justice under the Trump administration has withdrawn a lawsuit filed against North Carolina for their proposed bathroom bill. What are your feelings or comments on this?
The Trump administration has been incredibly harsh on trans people, starting, including Betsy DeVos and removing regulations for trans students to be able to use the bathroom congruent with their gender. So you start with that. You look at Trump's military ban that he announced via Twitter, calling trans people a burden. And implying that they're not just a burden to the military, but a burden to society. And then you look at, so there's this organization called the Family Research Council. It's a dramatically right-wing, conservative Christian group. And the president of this group has even said that they have unfettered access to the president that they've never seen like before. And the Family Research Council has put out this 5-point plan to try to eliminate trans identities, and not just to eliminate the identities, but kind of ostracize people and really not give any sort of legal precedence for trans people. And it's this 5-point plan that talks about bathrooms, it talks about gender markers, it talks about name changes, and how to ban all these things. And the Trump administration is already putting forward all these sorts of regulations that gel with this FRC 5-point plan. And the FRC praised with the president in the Oval Office. They're really bringing religion into the White House in a really conservative Christian way, in a way that's not congruent with a lot of Americans' values, and in a way that's discriminatory to trans people, just people in the queer community in general overall. And so the Trump administration's Department of Justice under Jeffrey Sessions withdrawing this lawsuit is essentially a way for the Trump administration to be like, oh no, it's okay to discriminate against trans people. It's okay, they're not real people, they're not real women or men or humans, they're less than. So it completely undermines all this societal growth that we've had over the past 20 years about acceptance of trans identities. And again, the Trump administration overall has created this platform for hatred because the president is this leader, and so because he's the leader, when he speaks hatred, it allows minority hating groups like the KKK, people that I was face to face with in Charlottesville, the alt-right, the neo-Nazis. It gives them platforms of legitimacy, and you see them coming out now with their faces unmasked. You see them coming out in huge numbers. You see them coming out because, they're no longer forced to hide in the closet with their hatred. They now can be like, oh, well, the president justifies this, and so it's okay for me to do this because this higher up power says it's fine if you hate. And so the Department of Justice under the administration withdrawing this lawsuit is so much more than just about trans people being able to use the bathroom, just letting trans people pee in peace.
Right, and it sounds like, I've read the 5-point plan as well, and it's very disturbing. One thing I noticed about it was that it really does dehumanize transgender people because it really wants to legally give them no allowance to
exist,
exactly, and then they can't work, and it just opens up all these avenues of discrimination, and it's really disturbing.
Yeah, and I mean, even the language behind it is very transphobic, dismissive of just the entire trans experience. And being trans, it's hard.
Right.
It's really difficult as a trans person to exist in this world, to deal with the sort of, not just like the physical discrimination and the physical harm that becomes all these people, but overcoming the emotional hurdles, all these things that you've been fed through society growing up. It makes it difficult for people, getting hormones is hard, figuring out what avenue you want to go down for a transition. And then, access to medical care for trans people is really hard. Access to trans-friendly medical care is even harder. Especially in like the Deep South, the Bible Belt, and some parts of the Midwest. So it completely eliminates the recognition of that struggle.
Right, and it seems as if they're really targeting with both the 5-point plan and also the bathroom bill laws. It really seems as if they're targeting children a lot who are beginning to realize that they identify with the gender with which they weren't born with, and I just feel as if they're really trying to make it so difficult and scary for someone
to transition,
who wants to transition, that they are trying to eliminate a future generation of trans people who might have otherwise transitioned but instead feel trapped in their own body and trapped in an identity which they don't identify with.
And as someone who lived in a societal, though it was forced on me, this male role, I can really attest to the difficulties of living in the role of a gender that you don't identify with. It's hell. It's a living hell to have to try to adhere to societal norms and adhere to these rules and regulations about gender that are not just in our society, but just as the FRC is putting out there should be in our laws.
Sure.
And it's so difficult to be trapped in a gender you don't identify with.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's wow. Yeah, and if there's one thing that you could say to the North Carolina legislator about what they need to know about the impacts near and far of their actions, what would it be?
Your actions are ruining lives. Your actions are, saying that you're going to protect children and that, from sexual assault from a man who pretends to be a woman. When in reality, you need to be more concerned about people like Harvey Weinstein, who are, sexually assaulting people, Ray Moore in Alabama. You need to be more concerned about the actual predators rather than perceived predators that statistically don't exist. And frankly, if you're not my sexual partner, you need to get out of my pants.
Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.